if we could all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Clerk, if you could call the roll, please.
Alderman Strelchak?
Here.
Alderman Bushy?
Here.
Alderman Meyer?
Here.
Alderman Hanscher?
Here.
Alderman Garrow?
Here.
Alderman Schneider?
Here.
Alderman Nurbin?
Here.
Mayor Worth?
Here. Obviously, everybody has heard the very sad news of the passing of Alderman Brian Schneider. We decided that it would only be fitting to at least acknowledge that and to take a moment of silence, and then Alderman Bushy has a few words that he'd like to say. Alderman Bushy, when you're...
Thank you. After last month's council meeting, many people saw Brian and I talking outside, as we often do after a nice long session of meetings. And he was telling me how he's looking forward to take his son to Arkansas for school. And he'd also asked me certain questions with his remodeling projects, if I know so-and-so or not. And to say that just days later, the news of his passing was a shock would be an extreme understatement. There's something about Brian's passing that I personally can't shake from my mind. At the funeral, there was hundreds of photos up there from his childhood and on. In all those photos, he was smiling from ear to ear. And that extended from his involvement with his family in his Special Olympics, doing the track and field with his sons up at Homestead. It was always a common message here. You could see how much he just loved doing things with his family and others around him. Now, Brian and I, we had some opinions the same, some different, but there's one thing that was definitely different between us. Nobody ever had to ask Brian to talk into the mic. There's lessons to be learned from this. And for me personally, this is something that I know I can take and try to speak up louder. And, this came through as alderman. He loved being an alderman, representing people in Mequon, being one of the first out to talk to people, to see what was going on, and seeing how he could make things work out between city and residents. And this is something I hope to be able to take away in my own life, speaking and being more proactive. I also like to say another thought on a personal level. Is that I know in many traditions that people say prayers at night. In mine, I get up in the morning and I have special prayers that I say. And when I get up and do those in the morning, like I said, there's something that happened that has changed my own personal mindset. And that is, instead of getting up in the morning and looking at my checklist and seeing what I have to do today, I now have a perspective of what do I get to do today. And that's something, with Brian being involved in the community, with Renee, his sons, Special Olympics. And speaking of Special Olympics, with not Special Olympics, Senior Olympics, that track and field has batons. And unfortunately, there's been a number of batons that have been dropped now. And what I do is I encourage everyone to pick up those batons and be involved with their families, be involved in the community, and one of the most important ones that he always spoke about was being a member of the Optimist Club, and I had encouraged that as well. And I hope that we can pick up those batons and continue on those thoughts and that drive and that passion that I know Brian showed. Now, I'm grateful to have Brian as a friend for a very unfortunately short period of time. And I only wish Renee and his sons that they have very positive memories, that they continue on, and that they have no more sorrow and only happiness in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, very well said. It's hard to move on from a topic like that, but move on we must, but it is any loss with people you work with is a difficult loss, and he certainly approached this position with a lot of enthusiasm. Our next item of business is a public hearing. We have a public hearing scheduled on an ordinance amending Chapter 58 of the Mequon Municipal Code relating to animal regulations. It was recommended by the Public Welfare Committee on July 9th. It was recommended by the Planning Commission on July 22nd, and we had a first reading at the Common Council last month. Do we have a motion to go into public hearing?
Move the public hearing.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Is there anyone here who came to talk about the animal ordinance? Hearing none, do we have a motion to close the public hearing?
Move to close the public hearing.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
The next item on our agenda is public appearances and public comment. Citizens wishing to address the council on any matter not on the agenda may do so at this time. If you want to be heard on an agenda on the item, you may be heard when that item is considered on the agenda. Please speak into the microphone. The time limit is 5 minutes. We have one person registered to speak, and that's Mr. Bob Wallerstein of Parkview Drive. Mr. Wallerstein, and if you'd step forward and speak into the microphone.
Hi, I'm Bob Wallerstein, live at 4707 West Parkview Drive, lived there for 47 years. I really like to express my condolences to Brian Schneider. There's two kinds of people in this world: takers and givers. Brian was a giver. I think that summarizes quite a bit, actually. In my 47 years living in Mequon, I've held a couple positions. County supervisor for 8 years, chairman of the board, economic development board, reserve police officer, 17 years, on the park board, on the board of appeals twice, and president of Mequon Country Estates Homeowners Association for 45 years. As a one-liner from Robert De Niro's movie, Scent of a Woman, I've been around, seen a lot of things happen. Some good, some not so good. Why I'm here today is, what brought me here this evening is something that was addressed about 12, 15 years ago, a bridge over the river from Mequon Country Estates, which I'm the president of for the last 45 years, to Thiensville Park. That was addressed, it was looked at, it went nowhere. A local restaurateur has brought it up again, thinks it's a great idea. I'll give you some reasons why I don't think it's a great idea. Number one, it's a NIMBY, which is basically not in my backyard. That's number one. Number two, the residents who will be affected by it would not be, shall we say, overly ecstatic. Number three, if somebody driving from the east side of Mequon, the park on Parkview Drive, to walk across the bridge to go to the park is rather remote because there's no parking on Parkview Drive. Another thing that came up with social media said, well, the kids can bike to Homestead High School. Wow! I called up Homestead High School and I asked, how many kids bike to school? They said, maybe 8, maybe 10, and who knows where they come from. The cost. I was on the committee in the county when we put the bike bridge over I-43, and I can almost assure almost everyone here in this room who's ever driven underneath that bridge probably never saw a bike on it. And that was like $450,000 10 years ago. Bottom line is the cost, the maintenance, again, not in my backyard, and I'm speaking for myself and the subdivision. If this issue ever comes up in front of you, I'll use the old squeaky wheel syndrome, which is basically I can fill this room up with people from my 144 neighbors who will probably address, like I, against this issue. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr.
Any
Wallerstein.
questions?
Well, this isn't a time for questions, but thank you, Mr. Wallerstein. The next item on our agenda is public officials' reports. I have 4 items. I will try to be brief. The first item is a proclamation, and I would be remiss if I didn't at least acknowledge the somewhat awkwardness of the moment of silence we went through and this particular item. But Chief, if you and your folks could step forward. Or if you step forward.
My name is David Bile. I'm the fire chief.
Microphone, Dave, because other than that, it won't get picked up by a microphone somewhere. Or else it won't get, is this one working? Other than that, it won't be picked up by the camera, and people on TV will be watching you go.
My name is David Bile. I'm the fire chief for the city of Mequon. And Mayor Worth has made it a point that we recognize people for their actions and positive events in the community, and that's why we're here tonight. I have some people I want to introduce. I want to start with an event that happened back on August 5th, and I think the first person that should come up here is Tim Ridley. If you want to bring up your wife, Jill. And then Jeff, you can follow him if you want. And Leah Hemsch, our dispatcher. And Jason Morrow, a police officer. Just stay in the line here. And then the members of the Mequon Fire Department, paramedic Greg Gillis, firefighter EMT Jacob Avaska, firefighter paramedic Josh Lipp, and paramedic Deputy Chief Kurt Zellman. Every year, about 400,000 people suffer a sudden cardiac event, and the American Heart Association tells us only about 6% of those people walk out of the hospital without any deficits. Back on August 5th, Jeff, I know that. You guys are all standing together now. Jeff happened to have that problem. He had the cardiac event. Tim. His neighbor Jeff was very close and was able to recognize the fact that there was something going on. He started CPR and called 911, where dispatcher Hemsch answered the phone, and dispatching the police units was able to coach Jeff through his CPR, which he took 25 years ago. And Officer Mortal showed up first with a defibrillator and was able to defibrillate Tim. And then the EMS crew showed up here and they followed up with some advanced cardiac life support measures. American Heart Association says that a strong chain of survival includes early recognition, early CPR, early activation of the 911 system, early defibrillation, and early ACLS drugs. And that was what was happening that day. So, to that end, Jeff, for your actions, I have a certificate of appreciation here from the City of Mequon Fire Department. And if I could just read this. It says, on Monday, August 5th, 2019, you recognize the cardiac arrest of your neighbor. Mr. Tim Ridley had no pulse, was not breathing, and without delay, you called 911, performed CPR with the assistance of the 911 operator. Upon the arrival of the Mequon Police and Mequon Fire units, care was continued. Shortly thereafter, Mr. Ridley's pulse was restored, and ultimately his life was saved. On behalf of the Mequon Fire Department and the citizens of this community, I'd like to commend you on your quick thinking and courageous response. It is with great confidence I can say that your actions saved Mr. Ridley's life. I just want to say, as the group of first responders here, we don't often get to see this this part of the thing here. We outside, and when we were in the green room, all talking together, there was a lot of handshaking, some crying, some hugging. But I'm glad that we all this all came out of a positive thing here. So thank you guys. Well done. Thanks. And the mayor.
Zilich all the way through because much of it repeats what the chief just said. But when I spoke to the chiefs about this, we wanted to make sure that it wasn't just coming from the departments, it was also coming from the city as a whole. I'll just read we should be very proud of our dispatchers, Officer Mortal, and our fire and ambulance personnel responded. They performed in a manner that is a credit to our city, their departments, and themselves. Nationally, only about 5% of our out-of-hospital cardiac arrest victims survive. However, resident Jeffrey Zilich deserves special recognition. If not for his selfless, quick, and heroic response, Mr. Ridley would not be with us today. My statistics from the same American Heart Association are slightly different, but each year more than 350,000 out-of-hospital cardiac arrests occur in the United States. CPR can double or even triple a cardiac arrest victim's chance of survival. And for every minute that a victim is without CPR, his or her chance of survival drops by 10%. Unfortunately, bystanders perform CPR only 37% of the time. Mr. Zilich did the right thing and started the process that saved Mr. Ridley's life. Mr. Zilich provided an example for all of us and a tangible reminder that we should all obtain basic CPR instruction. In consideration of the foregoing, on behalf of the citizens of the city of Mequon, I proclaim that today, September 10, 2019, is Jeffrey Zilich Day in the city of Mequon. And congratulations. Thank you all. Sir, if you didn't turn that off. Thank you. The next item on my mayor's report, and I'll try to make this quick, 8,000 or so residents of the city of Mequon attended Taste of Mequon this weekend. It's the biggest and best Taste of Mequon, I believe, out of the 7 years we've had it. It was a tremendous success, and the committee deserves special recognition. What people may not realize, these are a committee of dedicated volunteers who spend an entire year planning that event. It's a lot of work, and so I'd like to at least point out the chair, Bridget King, vice chair, Vanessa Nurbin, Dynami L. and Jerry, Carrie Hagerbaumer, Susie Dorzinski, Kirsten Hildebrand, Melissa Suring, and the newest members, Darren LaBelle, Gwen Haynes, and Janet Fussell, for putting on a great event. And we should never forget Lena Prosser, the staff liaison, who also makes sure that everything gets tied together. The third item on my report has to do with our October 8th meeting. Both because of Brian's vacancy, as well as that night is Yom Kippur, we will not have a quorum to even start a meeting if, in fact, we're short 3 aldermen. So at one point I thought we could start the meeting, adjourn it, and come back the next week. With only 5 aldermen, we can't hold a meeting, even to call it to order. So we may as well recognize tonight that we will not be having a meeting on October 8th. And I sent an email out today about October 1st because that also creates an issue with Rosh Hashanah. I'd ask aldermen to get back to me on that if you did. But on October 8th, hoping to reschedule the meeting to October 15th so we still can have an October meeting, but that we also can be respectful that October 8th is a very solemn day for some of our members. And the last item on the agenda, on my mayor's report, we're about to start our appropriations process. And I'd like to ask the council to give some consideration. And in the past, I've always been very leery, and I continue to be, about hiring consultants. I think sometimes it's a lot of money to where perhaps we ought to be doing things internally, or it doesn't end up with a great deal of bang for our buck. But I do think we have very quality people in our planning department, in our inspections department, in our engineering department. But we do run into issues in all of those departments in how they interact together in the planning process. And I don't know that we've ever had a look at how we do things from the perspective of how do other communities do it, and how would an outsider, both our equipment, our processes, our methods of interacting with applicants, to make sure, not that we're going to change our policies, but to make sure that our procedures are done better. So I'm hoping in the budget that the council will consider approving some funds, and we'll get to the amount and go through details during the budget process. But approve funds to do a comprehensive review of our planning and inspections processes. Then we can take what the consultants find and have planning and public welfare take those results and see if there are, more tangible recommendations that we can pull from the consultants' findings to make our processes better, and maybe our software and equipment and what have you. So that's the last item on my mayor's report for this evening. The next item is the city administrator's report.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. Just two brief updates this evening of interest to the motoring public here locally in Mequon. First and foremost, our City Hall reconstruction project with respect to our parking lot has recently been completed. The lot repaving and expansion, which added 53 spaces to the parking lot here to support activities in and around City Hall and the Civic Campus, was completed last Friday and open to the public in conjunction with the Taste of Mequon event last Saturday. There was not a space to be had during the event, so it was put to good use right away. So we thank the public for their patience during the project, which kicked off in April. And again, we've added approximately 50 spaces to the Civic Campus to support all of the activities that go on here at City Hall, at the library, and in and around the town center for the benefit of all of our visitors and our residents. And it's free parking, free unlimited parking. Secondly, we've got another public works project that is looking to wrap up. Cedarburg Road, currently between the village of Thiensville and the southern limits of the city of Cedarburg, is closed for a repaving project. The project was initially scheduled to be completed in November, but the crews, both the contractor and our public works crews, have been working, and it is anticipated that we'll be able to reopen Cedarburg Road to two-way traffic here in the next 1 to 3 weeks, well ahead of the anticipated completion time for that project. Currently, the road has been repaved. However, it is closed to two-way traffic because we do need to complete some road shouldering and some striping work for the safety of the motoring public. So we ask for a little bit more patience while the road is closed and finished up, but we're looking forward to having a nice new paved surface between the village of Thiensville and the northern limits of Mequon here in the next couple of weeks.
Thank you. The next items are consent agenda. Included on the consent agenda this month are the Common Council minutes of August, the Architectural Board minutes of July 8th and July 22, the Board of Review meeting minutes of May 1 and September 3, the Economic Development Board minutes of July 23, the Festivals Committee minutes of August 5, the Finance Personnel Committee minutes of July 9, the Fire Department reports for June and July 2019, the Water Utility Commission minutes of March 19th, the Milwaukee River Advisory Committee minutes of May 28th, the Planning Commission Policy Subcommittee minutes of August 5, the Public Safety Committee minutes of July 9, the Public Welfare Committee minutes of July 9, and the Public Works Committee minutes of July 9. We also have one resolution that's on the consent agenda, and that's a resolution adopting the updated local employer health insurance standards, guidelines, and administration manual from the Department of Employee Trust Funds, which was recommended tonight by the Finance Personnel Committee unanimously. Do we have a motion on the consent agenda?
Move approval.
Second.
And did anybody want to remove anything? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
The next part of our meeting will be Committee of the Whole. This is probably really the heart of our meeting this evening. The next three items. The first item will be the presentation of the 2019 Community Survey results and final report.
Thank you, Mayor. Tonight we have Dr. Joseph Serra from Neighborhood Analytics. He is their Director of Research. Neighborhood Analytics is one of the two organizations the city contracted with to complete our 2019 survey.
And just 1 second, and for the watching public, this is Justin Shaneman, our Assistant City Administrator speaking. But
Yeah.
go ahead.
Thank you. And tonight we have Dr. Sarah here to present the final report of the 2019 community survey. And without any further ado, I'll turn over the mic. Should be warming up.
My favorite screen.
Clean the filter?
Probably got to be a little bigger.
Putin hacked it. Putin hacked into there. Putin did it.
Looks even better.
Oh, you cleaned the filter.
Yeah.
It worked when we tested it 20 minutes ago.
Check the batteries.
While Justin's working on that, do you want to at least start the presentation, or?
Sure. So, good evening. My name is Joseph Serra, and as Mayor Worth just said, I'm here to present the results of the 2019 Community Assessment Study. The data in this presentation was collected by the Strategic Research Institute at St. Norbert College, and my firm, Neighborhood Analytics, analyzed the resulting data and compiled the report. So I just want to talk a little bit about my firm for just a moment. So Neighborhood Analytics consists of a group of scientists, teachers, and public servants, all by training, and we formed our company to address unmet needs in the public sector relating to data. Our expertise centers around looking at general organizational problems and turning them into more focused organizational questions that can yield answers that you can actually act on. And from those questions, we can help you understand what kind of data you need to collect to get a handle on what you're facing. And once you know what you need, we can help you get it, whether through surveys, focus groups, or direct measurement. And we can help you plan on how to store that data, move it, transform it, and report on it. And we can help analyze the resulting data. So if there's a thing that you're trying to understand, say turnover or satisfaction with services or some aspect of organizational performance, we can help identify what drives that thing. And if the thing that you are trying to understand lies at the end of a complicated process, we can help untangle that and figure out the independent influence of each contributing factor in the process and help you understand how the contributing factors interact to produce outcomes. And one of the things that we like to do best is help organizations predict future outcomes. So instead of constantly being in a reactive stance, putting out fires, you can change to a proactive stance and sniff out potential problems before they emerge. Turning to this project. So the purpose of the survey project, oh, here we go.
Hey, there we go.
All right. So the purpose of this survey project was to measure resident perceptions on a number of topics in order to provide guidance to Mequon officials as they make decisions and plan for the future. So the first item was development, residential, commercial, and industrial. Respondents were asked about their feelings on preservation of open space, economic development, satisfaction with city services, issues related to development on the civic campus, the community pool, and parks and pathways. So just going to give a brief overview. So the survey was distributed by mail to 8,574 addresses in Mequon. Each household received one paper copy of the survey via the U.S. Postal Service, and each survey packet also included a link to an online version in order to give households with multiple adult residents a way to share their input with the city, as well as contact information necessary to request additional paper copies if so desired. Data collection lasted from May 13th until June 17th, Just as a point of comparison, okay, so we had 1,010 additional paper copies requested on top of the 8,574 distributed by mail. We received 2,480 paper surveys back and an additional 978 valid surveys completed online. So just as a point of comparison, a similar survey project conducted by the Center for Urban Initiatives and Research at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee in 2013 got back 3,911 completed responses. So this round totals to 3,818, and that makes up about 20% of the adult resident population. So because we allowed multiple responses and it's possible for people to respond multiple times online, we employed IP address screening to prevent individuals from easily entering multiple responses online. So as part of the data analysis, we flagged any IP address with more than one response, and we removed all the responses from any IP addresses where 3 criteria were met: more than 2 responses, identical response patterns for a significant number of questions, and timestamps indicating back-to-back-to-back response entries. We ended up blocking 2 IP addresses and invalidated 16 surveys, so not a huge number. And I just want to note, because this study was based on data collected via an attempted census of all adult residents of Mequon, and random sampling wasn't used, there isn't going to be any discussion of statistical significance. Any differences across groups or change over time are presented as direct measurements of the pool of respondents, which is simply the subset of the population, which is adult residents of Mequon, that cared enough to respond to the survey. So I'm just going to speak briefly about demographics. So when looking at our respondents, we found that 51.5% had been residents of Mequon for 20 years or more. It's normal for survey projects of this type to skew slightly older, and we can see that here. 53% came from households with 2 adults, and 27.3% came from households with 2 adults and 1 or more minors. So one of the first things that we asked respondents were their reasons for moving to Mequon. And we presented a number of possibilities, and then also the option to choose other and then to specify. And so these are the top reasons listed for moving to Mequon. So 50.3% of folks who responded to the survey said that low taxes was a reason for coming here. About 46% said low crime. 45% because they had found a specific residence or lot. 44% had come here, at least in part, because of the schools. And 43% said they came here in part, at least to raise a family. Other options included the rural character, the feel of the community. They came here for work. They came here for family already living here. They were born here. They moved here with their parents, or other reasons. I'm going to really quickly switch over to a very short live dive into the data that just isn't possible in a static report. So please bear with me for a moment. So I apologize, this may be a little difficult to see because of the brightness in the room and the screen. But I thought it might be interesting to take a little bit of a deeper dive with all of you into the reasons why people come to Mequon. And I think that this chart can help shine some light on the complexity here. So most people came here for a number of reasons. There is the largest, you can see that the largest block in this whole area here represents everyone who cared to give a reason why, at least one reason why they moved to Mequon. You can see that the largest block of individual answers are people who said that they came here only because they found a specific residence or lot. But the vast majority of people came here for a number of reasons, and as I'm sure this won't surprise anyone to hear, several of those reasons cluster together. So, for instance, here is, you can see all the highlighted area are people who said that they came to Mequon, or they live in Mequon currently because they were born here. So there's a fair proportion of people that say that's the only reason they provided, but all of these folks down here, right, came for a large number of different reasons. And you'll see a similar pattern with a few other reasons. So for family already living here is another, right? So you can see all of the highlighted areas are people who said that they came here for family already living here, and folks who said that that is the only reason they came here make up a substantial proportion, right? And it's the same thing for, similar thing for, I came here for work. But then when you start getting into the more substantive reasons why someone might want to live here, like for instance, low crime, right? The incidence of folks who say that they came here for that reason only is very low. The vast majority of people who came here because they feel that the community has low crime also came here for other reasons which are related, like low taxes or to raise a family. So I'll just kind of go through and you can just give you a sense for the proportions for each one. So here's, I was born here, low taxes, low crime. I found a specific residence or lot for work, to raise a family, family already living here, moved with my parents, and you can see that's one of the cases where, for a good number of folks in this category, it's the only reason they're here. Schools, the feel of the community, and the rural character, and the last was other. And so what we definitely noticed during the analysis was that low taxes, low crime, to raise a family, and schools were all clustered together as reasons. So it's not really, it doesn't appear that people are moving here for any one reason. It definitely appears that they're moving here for a basket of reasons. Okay. All right, so continuing on. So the first section of the survey, the first substantive section, asked respondents to share their preferences and views regarding residential, commercial, and industrial development. Blocks of questions focused on the East Growth area in the upper right-hand section of the map, it's highlighted, and the Port Washington Road corridor south of Mequon Road specifically, and you can see that's the cross-hatched portion on the lower right-hand part of the map. And then some development questions asked about Mequon in general. So first, respondents were asked about whether they supported or opposed 10 specific residential development types in the East Growth area. And this chart shows the average response for each question, where 0 is oppose, 1 is neutral, and 2 is support. And you can see that on average, respondents were more likely to support single-family homes and oppose multi-unit residential development in the East Growth area. And respondents were also more likely than not to support senior-focused developments. Just going to leave this slide up for a moment just so people can soak it in. Next, residents were asked about their support or opposition regarding a number of non-residential development types in the East Growth area. Those include academic facilities, large farming and hardware stores, gas stations, grocery, health and personal care, hospitality, specifically lodging, restaurant, entertainment, industrial, park and open space, professional or medical office, retail or clothing, and sporting goods. So for this battery of questions, respondents were asked if they supported each development type anywhere in the East Growth area, if they supported the development type only at the intersection of Port Washington Road and Pioneer Road, if they were neutral, or if they opposed the development type altogether. So we found that 55.1% of respondents support academic facilities anywhere in Mequon, and that 71.1% support park and open space development anywhere in Mequon. These were the only times where the development types garnered a clear majority. I'm sorry, that's a mistake. Anywhere within the East Growth area. I apologize for that mistake. These are the only times that that a clear majority of respondents favored development of these types anywhere within the East Growth area. Majority support for hospitality development existed at the intersection of Port Washington Road and Pioneer Road. So 41.1% supported development of this type anywhere in the East Growth area, and 17.8% supported it at the intersection. There were more supporters than opponents, but no clear majority for professional or medical office, large farming hardware store, gas station, grocery, health and personal care, and retail and clothing development. A few of these items only had more supporters than opponents at the intersection of Port Washington Road and Pioneer Road. And you can see the detailed spread of responses in the report. And then for sporting goods, there was mixed support. So there was a similar proportions of opponents and supporters. And most respondents opposed industrial development in the East Growth area, 53.8%. So following this battery, respondents were asked about light industrial development in the East Growth area specifically. And that in the survey was characterized as professional office, research and development, and light manufacturing or processing that does not generate nuisances such as odor, noise, vibration, or hazardous conditions. And with these specifications, 44.9% indicated that they would support development of light industrial development in the East Growth area. 26% were neutral, while 29.1% opposed. Now, we did find some.
Would you
Sure.
qualify that or characterize that as support?
The way that I would characterize that is that just supporters outnumber opponents. I mean, it doesn't achieve majority support, but the largest proportion of people were in support. So there was some variance by aldermanic district. So one of the things we did was we asked respondents to specify what aldermanic district they lived in. And we provide them with a map so they could say for sure. We didn't just ask like, oh, what's the district number you live in? And we found that perhaps unsurprisingly, opponents outnumbered supporters in District 5, while other districts had more supporters than opponents. Now, Mayor Worth just asked how I would characterize that. So you can see here that in District 4, there was a clear majority of respondents who supported developing light industrial developments in the East Growth area. And the opposition in District 5, it wasn't that there were a majority of respondents that were opposed. There were just more people who said that they were opposed than there were people who said that they were in support. So next, respondents were asked about residential development types in the Port Washington Road corridor. Respondents were most likely to support some single-family home developments. One house per acre was the most popular. Two-family homes and townhomes were more likely to draw opposition than support, and clear majorities of respondents opposed apartments with up to 8 units and apartments with 9 units or more. In terms of support for senior-centric housing developments, more respondents were more likely to support than oppose, but there were not clear majorities in favor of these development types in the Port Washington corridor.
South of Mequon Road.
Yes, south of Mequon Road. Respondents were also asked about support for residential development types for Mequon in general. On average, respondents support single-family residential types with 1 house per acre and greater than 1 to less than 5 acres being the most popular. Again, multi-unit housing was less popular, especially apartments. And in terms of how people feel about development of these types anywhere in Mequon, respondents were more likely to support than oppose senior housing or retirement community development. Next section of the survey involved asking respondents about to gauge how the city is doing with open space development. And so they were asked, what is your opinion on the amount of open space that's currently protected by the city? And you can see that about 61% said the right amount, about 34% said not enough, and 5.5% said too much. Respondents were asked about whether or not the city should use tax revenue to preserve additional open space. And you can see that just short of a majority of folks, 47.6%, said yes. It's interesting that that percentage is actually larger than the proportion of people who, on the last slide, said that they wanted to see more open space protected by the city. So at least some folks who are satisfied with the current amount would also be okay with spending tax revenue to preserve additional open space. Meanwhile, about 26% said that they would not be okay with using tax revenue for open space preservation, while 26% said that they were neutral. Respondents were asked about development of residential cluster lots, also known as conservation subdivisions, which offer a trade-off between lot size on one hand and open space preservation and required infrastructure on the other. And this graphic was presented on the survey, and what I just said was all, I'm paraphrasing what was in the survey. So respondents were instructed that that's the relevant trade-off when it comes to making a choice for this kind of subdivision. So when asked if the city should continue to encourage these cluster residential developments, 64.9% said yes, and 15.5% said no, with the remainder indicating neutrality. Respondents were also asked about the city's use of transfer of development rights of lots from one site to another to prevent residential development from occurring on sites that have attributes that may merit preserving, like environmentally sensitive areas. And once again, respondents were instructed to similar effect. And 45.5% said yes, while 26.2% said no when asked if the city should continue to encourage the use of transfer development rights. So the next section of the survey had to do with economic development tools, and respondents were asked about their support or opposition to a number of them. So respondents supported continued use of every economic development tool they were asked about. So the first was promoting business retention and expansion. And you can see that in the data here, 70.3% indicated they supported the continued use of that tool, while 11% opposed. Regarding improving existing infrastructure, such as streets and sidewalks, about 86% were in support, while 4% opposed. Adding amenities such as lighting, landscaping, and benches, 67.5% support, while 22% opposed. Purchasing undervalued or underutilized sites, 57.5% in support and 20% opposed. Incentivizing redevelopment of underutilized or undervalued sites, 63.7% support and 17.3% opposed. And incentivizing redevelopment of blighted sites, 73.3% support and 12.1% opposed. And finally, incentivizing redevelopment of environmentally contaminated sites, similar number, 73.9% support and 11.8% opposed. I will point out that while majorities were in support of all these tools, there was substantial variation. It doesn't appear that respondents were just going through and checking boxes willy-nilly. There are definitely, some of these tools are more widely supported than others. But at the end of the day, a majority of respondents support use of all of them. The next section asked respondents to state their satisfaction with city services. So this chart shows the average level of satisfaction with each service, where 0 is poor, 1 is fair, 2 is good, and 3 is excellent. Only respondents who indicated that they had interacted with the service in question were allowed to provide a ranking. And it's notable that the average level of satisfaction for every service is positive. That being said, some services were much more popular than others, or I should say that respondents were more satisfied with some services than others. So fire, EMS, police, election services, voter registration, and park maintenance were the most highly rated service in terms of satisfaction, while stormwater management, inspections and permitting, architectural review board, and road maintenance had the lowest satisfaction rankings. Respondents were presented with a list of improvements to the civic campus, which was defined in the survey as the area encompassing the city hall, the library, the community pool, and Renicky Field. Am I saying that right? Okay. And asked to list which were necessary to make traveling around the civic campus comfortable. So you'll see that only sidewalks garnered a majority of respondents saying they were necessary for comfortable traveling around the civic campus. I'll just leave this slide up for a moment so you can look through the other items. And just in case it wasn't clear, the percentage next to each item is the percentage of respondents who said that that item would be necessary in order to create comfortable travel within and around the civic campus. The next question asked specifically about support for adding bike trail amenities, and in the survey, it said such as a rest area, restrooms, and a snack shop along the interurban bike trail adjacent to the civic campus. The largest group of respondents were in support of this, well, so just shy of a majority, 47%, while about 28% said that they were opposed, and the remainder neutral. Respondents were also asked about the support for a pedestrian bridge and or underpass at the Mequon Road and Ozaki interurban bike trail intersection. So respondents had the option to support one or the other, so either an underpass or a pedestrian bridge. They could indicate support for both. They could indicate opposition to both, or they could say that they were neutral. So the plurality of residents, so the largest group of respondents said that they were opposed to both. 22% said that they supported constructing a pedestrian bridge only, and 4.6% said that they supported constructing an underpass only, while 17.2% said that they supported constructing both. The next questions asked about the future of the community pool. Respondents were informed in the survey that the pool was built in 1984 and that soon the city will be faced with a choice between redevelopment or closure. So some of the questions that we asked were revolved around use. So we found that 21.8% of respondents say that they or their families have used the pool within the last 3 years, while 22.5% said that they or their families use a neighboring community pool within the last 3 years. Respondents were asked specifically whether they supported or opposed construction of a new community pool, given the alternative of the city exploring closing the current pool. And a slight majority, 53.8%, were in support, while just under a quarter, 22.2%, said that they were opposed, while 24% remained neutral. The next question asked about whether or not respondents would support an increase in taxes in order to finance the reconstruction or the redevelopment of the community pool. So although a majority of respondents supported redevelopment, in terms of a tax increase to pay for it, opponents outnumber supporters. So you can see that opponents consist of about 46.5% of respondents, while supporters consist of 32.9%. So combining these two questions together, when you overlay them, it looks like respondents are relatively evenly divided on the issue. So those in support or neutral about redevelopment, but who support a tax increase to fund the new pool, together with those who support a new pool but are neutral towards the tax, so that would be these two groups, make up about 45% of respondents. Well, those who oppose the pool and tax, together with those who support the pool but oppose the tax, constitute about 45% of respondents. So it seems that you folks have a bit of a tough question on your hands here.
Unless we can have somebody else pay for it.
So the last question in this section asked about whether or not respondents would they use the new community pool if it were built, or would their families use it? And 27.9% said that they would. And it's notable that this proportion is higher than the proportion who say that they currently have or recently have used it. And then respondents were also asked about the possibility of relocation of the community pool from the civic campus to another city-owned location with more space, such as a park. And supporters of this idea were more likely, or there were more supporters of this idea than opponents. So the final section of the survey focused on potential development and funding for parks and bike and pedestrian trails. And the first question asked respondents to rank 10 proposed park improvements in order of preference. So ranked choice voting was used to determine a joint prioritization of the items that gives every respondent's complete preference ordering the highest possible influence. So how this method works is, as you systematically go through options with the lowest counts of top votes, you take those votes and you redistribute those votes to the less popular option, you redistribute the votes for the less popular options to the corresponding respondent's next most preferred option. So this ranked choice voting is also known as instant runoff voting, and it helps policymakers winnow down a large group of items to the most popular while taking every respondent's complete preference ordering into account. So after doing this procedure, the clear highest preferred item was pedestrian trails within parks, and that garnered 1,321 votes after winnowing down through 9 rounds of voting. The next was invasive plant removal and restoration, which garnered 961 votes. After that, permanent bathroom facilities at Lemke Park. Increased access to the Milwaukee River was next with 468 votes. Off-road paved bike path at the intersection of West Donges Bay Road was the next highest with 374. Updating the River Bark Park, Rotary Park, and Reuter Park buildings were next with 237 votes. An additional dog park garnered 176 votes. Pickleball courts and tennis courts garnered 126 votes. Upgrades to existing ball diamonds garnered 105. And a separate area for small dogs at Catherine Kearney Carpenter Park garnered 6 votes.
Does that mean that none of these items, I mean, there were 3,000 and some people voting. We really can't tell whether a percentage of the people would not be in favor of any of these things, can we, from this? It's simply ranking.
That's correct. The respondents weren't asked if they flat out opposed. They just put them in order of preference. I think it's relatively safe to assume that folks were just not excited about items that are at the bottom of the rankings, but there's no way to differentiate in the way we formulated this between someone just having a less preference for something and someone flat out opposing it. So in this section, respondents were also asked about support for an increase in property taxes to fund park improvements. So the way that this question was formulated, respondents had the opportunity to indicate their support for multiple levels, different levels of a tax increase. So you can see that 14.4% supported an amount not to exceed 1 cent per thousand in assessed value. About 20% supported a 2-cent increase per $1,000 in assessed value. About 27% supported an amount not to exceed 5 cents per $1,000 in assessed value. 14% were neutral, and 25% opposed any tax increase. So our interpretation of this would be that only a tax increase not to exceed 1 cent per $1,000 in assessed value would garner a clear majority of respondents, but an increase of 2 cents per $1,000 in assessed value, if a tax increase at that level would garner more supporters than opponents, assuming that people who are okay with a higher tax increase would also be okay with a lower tax increase. Respondents were asked to indicate whether or not they supported various bike or pedestrian improvements within the city. So this formulation, I think, would be more amenable to being able to make the determination of whether or not a group of people didn't want to do something. So they weren't asked to rank, they were just asked to say here, to indicate which of the items they supported. So the only item that garnered a clear majority of supporters was off-road paths, with 55.3% indicating support. Respondents were asked about another possible property tax increase in order to create a fund to support bike and pedestrian improvements specifically. It's the same formulation as the last tax increase question, so respondents could indicate their support for various levels of increase, and it's the same story. So only an increase of not to exceed 1 cent per thousand in assessed value would garner the support of a majority of respondents, but a 2 cent per $1,000 in assessed value increase would yield more supporters than opponents. And I'm just going to quickly go back 2 slides just so you can kind of see the difference in the distribution of responses between this one and the other tax increase question? So you can see that overall support for tax increase is slightly lower for this item. All right, and that's all. So I'm happy to take any questions from Mequon policymakers at this time.
Anybody? Alderman Garrow.
I was part of the picking out the questions for this, and when I sat back and watched your presentation, I think you did an outstanding job, and it was really what I believe it ended up being very representative of our community as a whole. So thank you.
It was my pleasure.
Anybody else? Alderman Meyer.
I just want to thank the committee members. It was quite a few months that we went through this process, and especially our Assistant City Administrator, Justin, did a great job on that. It was a long road to get it all to this process on it without the city's complete help inside of doing this, and that we wouldn't gotten to this result. So appreciate everybody's help in doing that. Thank you.
Alderman Strelchak.
I'll just keep it brief. This was probably the best presentation I've seen as an alderman yet. The way that you dove into the analytics and you talked about how each question was representative was excellent. The committee that put together the questions just did a fabulous job. You know, I agree with everyone that said that this is representative of our community, but I think the questions came forth and they were unbiased and the results are true. And then your analytics and the presentation of this was just simply fabulous. So thank you.
Oh, sorry, Alderman Schneider.
Actually, I just had a question about it. You alluded briefly to the fact that older people tend to be better about returning their responses in terms of surveys in communities. And you also mentioned that it sounds to me like you can't really know if this is reflective of the demographics specifically of our community. Is that so? I mean, because we wouldn't have had an actual census here, you know, since 10 years ago maybe. So just in general, do you think this reflects our community? We do have an older community, meaning our mean age, I think, is, what is it, 49 compared to 39 in the state of Wisconsin. So this may just be reflective of our community, or does it look like young people didn't respond? Do you have any way of knowing that?
I mean, no, we don't have any way of knowing it. What I will say is that it's very likely that the results are representative of the group of folks in Mequon who care enough to take any kind of action, whether it's voting or coming to meetings, to participate in community governance. And when I say that these types of projects, the results tend to skew a little bit older than the population at large, it's just merely a factor, it's merely a result of the fact that folks with more resources and more time on their hands are in a better position to give back to the community and participate in community governance. Whereas younger folks, people with less resources, people who are still working, they find it a little bit harder to take the time away from just meeting their core needs to do things like that. I mean, one of the nice things about the approach that Mequon took here was that they really, I think, tried to reach out to everyone in the community and give everyone a chance to be contacted. Many communities aren't willing to foot the bill to do that type of thing and are forced to use statistical estimation and random sampling in order to try to get a slice of their population that is representative as possible of the population at large. But then you'll have to contend with sampling error as a source of bias in the results, and that's simply not the case when you're able to reach out to everyone in your community and gather the results from people and everyone who's willing. I hope that answers your question.
There was a concern at one point about the appearance of the envelopes that arrived at people's homes maybe not reflecting the fact it was a survey from Mequon and that some of them may have been discarded and hopefully you reached out to everybody and they came and got another paper survey, but did you feel like this response was, I realize you're not looking for statistical significance, you mentioned, but did you feel like it was a robust enough response to be valid?
So, generally speaking, in mail surveys of this length, the industry standard for a response rate is about 10%. And we can't really calculate a response rate because the initial paper responses from the initial mailing were mixed in with the paper responses from the extra requests for paper copies. But when you compare the proportion of responses that we received both online and through the mail to the 2018 Census Bureau's estimate of Mequon's adult population, it constitutes about 20%. So, I mean, it's definitely a very healthy slice of the adult population of Mequon residents, and it's comparable to the results of the last wave. So, I mean, I think the responses were a little bit lower, but in the last couple of years, there's just been an epidemic of survey research having difficulty contacting people because there are just so many more surveys. Like people in the profession refer to survey fatigue. So it's actually, I feel it's relatively impressive that the community we garnered so many responses from the community.
Thank you.
Alderman Bushi.
I'd just like to add what everyone else had said, yeah, speaking to the mic, is that the visualizations were fantastic as well. And I'd also like to say a great job by Justin for all the go-between and adding extra information with the requests. Thanks.
Glad to help, thanks.
And I just want to thank everybody on the committees who worked with my organization. This is not an easy thing for communities to pull together and come to an agreement on what are we going to ask about, how are we going to ask about it, and we really hope that we helped you guys get the information you need in order to get a better handle on the policy preferences of your constituents. And it was a pleasure working with the city representatives on this project, and I really wish you all the best.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we'll be in contact in 6 years, at least whoever's still here. Thanks. The next item on our agenda is the District 6 aldermanic vacancy. Who's going to be talking to us about this item?
I think that's me.
Right?
So as everybody is aware, with Alderman Schneider's passing, creates a vacancy in his office for that particular aldermanic district. The statute specifies for us how that vacancy is filled. Actually gives some flexibility in some cases. However, based on the timing of his passing and the creation of the vacancy, we really only have one option, which is that we would fill the vacancy now. There would be a special election for that individual in April of 2020, so just in a handful of months here. And then that would be for the rest of the term. That term then is presently scheduled to end in 2021. So they would, in essence, run back-to-back campaigns in 2021 and 2020. Which is in some cases unfortunate, but that's kind of the choice that the statute gives us. In terms of the process, I think many of us either were here with our last vacancies or were direct results of our last vacancies. And so you kind of have an understanding of how our code provides for filling that vacancy as well, in terms of the request of having an application, and then a committee of the whole where we interview individuals, and then ultimately an appointment. Within the materials in your packet, you see a recommendation from the clerk's office with respect to potential proposed dates for which that process could work its way out. It's my understanding that the selection of the dates was done in an effort to try to mirror the same process as we had used in the prior vacancies in terms of the amount of time we offered. So,
Question. Assuming that we adopt this schedule, if a replacement alderman is selected on November 12th at the beginning of the council meeting, may that person be seated for the balance of that meeting?
They could be sworn in immediately and then sit that night.
Thank you. Any questions, discussions, or are we in agreement that this is how we should proceed? I think there is some, if you read the statute, it says unless otherwise ordered by the common council, a successor shall be elected for the residue of the expired term, but this is how we've done this historically. Anybody, any comments? Alderman Garrell.
Yeah, I think that's exactly how we did it before. We interviewed, made a selection, and then they were sworn in before the council, and then they sat in on that meeting, so we, got them online as fast as we could.
All right. This is a committee of the whole, but we could have a motion to approve this.
So moved.
record.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
So that's how we will proceed. The next item on the agenda is the requested feedback to WISDOT, I-43 North-South Freeway. Ms. Lundin, welcome.
Thank you. Good
Excuse me,
evening, Mayor,
Director.
Common Council. The most recent state budget finally allocated money for the I-43 North-South Corridor project that we last spoke about 5 years ago. I have in here some brief history about what got us to this point, but due to both some changes in legislation and resumption of the project has led to WISDOT asking for some feedback on a number of particular items. So with that, I'd like to march through what they otherwise are, and I will subsequently provide any feedback from the Committee of the Whole to WISDOT in order to be able to incorporate into their final design. They will be hosting a series of public information meetings, so not only elected officials, but obviously the public will be notified of those to be able to continue to comment on the design plans as they move forward. The construction actually won't be anticipated to begin until 2021 at the earliest. We will be able to provide more information on phasing as they move through the final design in terms of when the work will actually be done in Mequon. For those that recall, this will actually start essentially at the Silver Spring interchange. It does not include the Silver Spring interchange, but that's where it starts, and it goes as far north as Highway 60. With that, WISDOT requested City of Mequon feedback on the County Line interchange, which I'll actually pause. We have a separate resolution where we'll otherwise consider that. First, they're seeking whether or not the city would be in favor of a traffic signal at County Line Road and Port Washington Road. The intersection there is under the jurisdiction of 2 different counties and 3 different municipalities. So in the past, it has been difficult to gain a consensus as to whether or not a traffic signal should be implemented there. The current traffic conditions don't otherwise meet the warrants for a traffic signal, but under their modeling that they've otherwise completed as a part of the project, they have at this point in time recommended a traffic signal. Milwaukee has otherwise indicated that they would take maintenance responsibility for the traffic signal, assuming that there was otherwise local support.
Well, our chairman is gone, so I guess I'll just
all
jump
talk at
right
once.
in. But, that particular intersection, I believe, could benefit greatly from a traffic signal. I drive through there on a number of occasions, not daily, but I frequently observe many close calls, and it's difficult to merge into traffic, mostly because people are exceeding the speed limit, but we're never going to really be able to control that or stop that from happening completely. Just having the ability to have an interchange or a traffic signal there to allow safe left-hand turns from people heading east on County Line Road onto Port Washington would be a huge benefit. It's a pretty dicey situation when traffic volumes are up, so it's got my support.
I just want to second that, and you can attest to the fact that I have contacted you in the past, probably more than once, because the residents that live east of Port Washington Road are having a lot of struggle there, and it has to do not only with the speed of traffic coming from the freeway, but that road isn't absolutely straight there. So there's a bit of a curve, so the visibility isn't good. And I'm actually very, very happy to see this on the agenda, because I know this has been challenging from a jurisdiction point of view, and I do truly believe that there needs to be a traffic light there.
Calling on people.
Alderman Strelchek.
I would concur. I travel that intersection frequently. I think a traffic light there would be very appropriate. People do have a tendency to exceed the speed limit, and just emerging, especially during rush hour traffic or freeway accident situations where you've got an overabundance of people traveling north and south just to avoid freeway traffic that might be backed up. It's just very appropriate. And I don't think it'll inconvenience anybody. It'll only be a convenience and a safety measure for the residents, so it's a positive for me.
I have a question. Would the speed limit change at all because of the off-ramp?
There's not a proposed for a speed limit change at this point.
Leave 1 minute, just chaos. Alderman Carroll.
I think that Alderman Nervin and Alderman Schneider, that's right in their districts where their districts split, and they know that area really well, and I agree with their thought process on that. They're the ones who would be the most knowledgeable of us here tonight.
Do we want to take a vote to give feedback? I would suggest maybe we have a motion, or how about just a straw poll? All in favor of the
Interchange.
traffic signal, sorry, at that intersection, raise their hand.
I think you want a formal, because this is committee of the whole with a recommendation for action subsequently on the
Well,
council
this one,
agenda.
there's no request for action.
Nope, just on the resolution. This
Oh,
is just
so
feedback
this is
that I'll
simply to
otherwise
give-
provide to
You're right.
Give
us.
instructions
You're right.
to staff. So we would like, I think that was unanimous, correct? So we'd like a traffic signal there. The next item, it would be bike pedestrian facilities, right?
Yes, and depending on the views of the committee of the whole, we can either take these all together if there's support for bicycle and pedestrian facilities in all locations, or if there's support for some and not others, then we can take them individually.
Comments? Suggestions? Anybody? Alderman Nervin.
Well, I know it's particularly problematic for bicyclists traveling, trying to connect to Milwaukee County to the south. In fact, I don't bike that way anymore because it's dicey getting through there around that, it's around the same intersection we just talked about for the traffic signal. You have to drive in traffic. You can attempt to drive on the sidewalk, but the sidewalk's in such poor condition on the east side of the road. Unless you have a fat bike, you're not going to make it. I'm not sure of the other interchanges. I think to the south, there's just no connection to Milwaukee County. It's probably a little more critical there than the other ones. But again, if you're going to go touching all these intersections, making them have provisions to accommodate bike traffic is probably warranted for consideration. There might be site-specific constraints that make it more or less necessary at some of the other ones, but I'm open to feedback on the other ones. I just know that part of town the best.
Could I interject before I call on Alderman Strelchek? Once they build these, if they in fact will, because that's certainly open for discussion under the new rules, forever after, repair, maintenance, replacement would not be a DOT issue, correct? It would fall on the city.
Correct, as would snow removal, which depending on what the answers to some of these are, will be a subsequent question that I ask at a future meeting, so.
Okay. I just want to make sure that people realize that every time we build a bike path, we have
Don't
to
get me wrong,
replace it.
it could just be a wider shoulder there. There's no shoulder in that part of the road.
I'm not saying I'm opposed, I just think that that's important to
I share
consider
your
every
same
time
concern.
we add a mile of bike path, we are
Yeah.
telling the community for the next 100 years, we'll be replacing it about every, 15 to 20 years, so that there's a cost there. Alderman Strelchak.
I've traveled both of the intersections via bike multiple times over generations. I feel that the south interchange, as you're coming down Lakeshore, if you're taking, a non-main route, you're coming down Lakeshore, and then you literally, the only way to get on to go further south is to get onto Port Washington Road to connect in through Bayside to get down to Milwaukee. So if you have any bike commuters heading south, that literally is the only direct path to do there. I think if we failed to do a bike path, a wider shoulder or do something substantial for bicyclist safety, I think we would be grossly remiss in our planning on that level. I mean, it's not only a maybe, it's a must, as far as bike safety is concerned. Also further north on the Highland Road interchange, I grew up on Maple Crest, just on the other side of the Highland House. That whole corridor down Highland, all those residents there, when they go for a long bike ride, they typically go across the bridge, they go up Lakeshore, they go up Highway C, they go up to Port Washington, and then they kind of come back down. The only access is through that interchange. The only safe way to get through that interchange is with a wider bike lane. I also know that when DOT came through and they were doing some designs and some drawings and some things like that, I worked pretty effectively with them. I talked to them about the bike needs and the things like that. All of the proposals that came forward had a wider bike lane, bike/pedestrian, one going on each side, one heading east, one heading west for that bicyclist safety. So, I'm not sure what they're asking or why they're asking. It was in before, we shouldn't take it out.
Well, they're asking because the law changed. So Trans 75 was in effect 5 years ago, which otherwise obligated them to provide bicycle and pedestrian facilities, and Trans 75 has subsequently been repealed, so they are no longer required to.
I would just say the agreement that they had with the city in order for us to partially fund that interchange was one with bike lanes, and that's what we agreed on as a community, and I would lean on them heavily from that standpoint if we have the ability to possibly do that.
Alderman Meyer.
I guess, I guess the question is whether we want to have, and this is just not a bike question, it's actually a pedestrian walkway question, and whether or not that we want to have concrete walkways in that area and then have the city have responsibility for it. I think we all agree that there should be some kind of bike paths, something maybe adjacent to the road, but I don't foresee us having a concrete sidewalk in areas where a lot of times it doesn't go anywhere. It starts someplace and then it doesn't end up going anywhere half the time. We see some of that like on, I think when over in County Air, that when the state put that intersection in over there right by Germantown and that has just, I think some bike paths in there, don't go anywhere on it. But that's kind of one of the requirements to put that stuff in. And I would not be in favor of.
Country Air?
Country, yeah.
The world's largest intersection. That
Yes.
has
Yeah, it goes nowhere and does nothing. But anyways, but I would not be in favor of having, concrete sidewalks in that area. If there is something though for, bike paths to help in that.
Which area are you talking about?
So maybe it would
All
be
of them.
simplest to just take it
All of them.
section by section, and therefore we can discuss in each of them whether, and we can probably more generically just designate it as a separated path, so meaning something that is not alongside the road, whether that's concrete or asphalt, versus something that would be on road, so a paved shoulder or another accommodation. So the first question, just in order of the packet, was whether or not the Common Council or city supports a separated path from the County Line Road north to the existing sidewalk on Port Washington Road. That's the section Alderman Nurbin was otherwise referring to.
So why don't we do straw polls on each of these, or, hand raise, if that's okay, unless we want to have a discussion on each.
So
Alderman
I just,
Mucci.
go ahead.
I have questions on some of them.
Okay, Alderman, on this particular
On
one.
the first one, but
Well, we're
Well, I just
do
want to
one
know,
at a time.
are we talking, when we're doing this, are you talking a concrete sidewalk? Are you talking
So
just a
actually, in the
bike path?
current design, the separated path is actually, if I recall correctly, on the west side, and it's not concrete, it's asphalt. It's more of
Okay.
an off-road path because there's more right-of-way on the west side to be able to otherwise build it.
Okay.
Okay, Alderman Bushi?
So with the county line intersection, I know from running and biking experience, is that that S going over the highway is always disconcerting when going south, because you never know when a car is going to actually turn left or going to go straight. And even coming back with not much room, if you're running or biking, coming over that intersection, it's difficult.
At the actual County Line Road and Port Road
No.
intersection, or at the
North of it.
interchange?
North where the road splits to go over the
Yes.
highway and then continues south to the intersection.
The road that's the real way that people get on the highway where it
That's
splits
Port
from
Lane.
Yes.
from
It's what
the
it's called what?
fake way to the
Port
highway.
Lane.
Fort Lane. So that's where, to me, there's a lot of,
That one's our road, so if there's
So-
anything we want to do there, that's on us.
okay, so that's a difficult intersection. And then there, again, there's not much room given the speed of the cars going over there. So to me, there's lots of opportunity for improvement in that area.
Okay, so let's,
This
straw
one's an
poll on-
asphalt park, asphalt.
And again, right now, all they're saying is separated path, but they're not proposing a traditional concrete sidewalk, at least at this stage.
Okay, all in favor of a
I
separated
have a
path?
question quick.
Oh, Alderman Carroll.
Just a real quick question. If we put an asphalt path in, I mean, that doesn't, most people don't ride their bikes in the winter. Is that going to require snow plowing in the winter?
I will come back at a subsequent meeting and ask that probably of more of the paths in general. It doesn't, we have the choices to make about whether we decide to plow them, decide not to plow them, or otherwise decide to make the adjacent property owner responsible for plowing them.
Okay, but on the first item,
Yes,
all in favor, raise their hands.
All in favor of what?
separated path.
The separated path from the county line north to the existing sidewalk along Port Washington Road.
Yeah.
Okay, that looks unanimous.
Is-
The next question is, does the common council support a sidewalk at the Mequon Road interchange on the south side from Port Washington Road east to San Marino Drive?
Mequon Road.
Can we talk about that?
Sure, we can talk about it. I didn't.
Oh, yeah, that goes right in between mine and Alderman Nurbin's district, and, you know, I go through there almost every day. I cut through there almost every day. I don't think, in that area, there's gonna be a lot of use for a sidewalk. I don't think there's gonna be a lot of people cutting underneath the freeway to get over. They're gonna drive their car. They're not gonna walk from San Marino over to the Culvers. I mean, I just don't see it. I haven't seen a lot of pedestrian traffic, so I'll refer to Alderman Nurbin and see if he has seen anything different.
If I might only clarify about the terminus, so right now there is sidewalk that goes from Port Washington Road east through the interchange, and then it stops. And so as a part of this project, WISDOT is looking for where a natural terminus would be for that sidewalk. And San Marino just happens to be the next intersection that would otherwise allow for a dead end versus it stopping at the traffic light or I'm sorry, at the railroad or another
The
arbitrary
question is, do
location.
you leave a stub, or do you bring the stub at least to a road so that the
Yes.
stub makes some sense? And I'm kind of indifferent to the whole issue, but
I'll see what Alderman Nurbin
Alderman
says.
Nurbin.
I actually have a fairly decent-sized number of residents, because I don't get emails on lots of things, but I've gotten several on this one from a number of residents who would actually want that for the connectivity. And I think the reason you don't see people going through there now is when you traverse the tracks, there's a little bit of a hump and there's very little shoulder. It's very dangerous. So everyone stays away from it. I think it actually would get use if it was extended to San Marino. I don't want to start putting sidewalks everywhere in Mequon, but there actually has been a small outcry for that amenity from people living in that area.
Alderman Boucher.
I have actually kind of a general question that applies to this, and maybe as you go north on the questions. If you put in a sidewalk, first of all, it's going to take away from, I assume, some private property or, the right-of-way there. And then at the same time, I'm concerned as well with any of these with any of the sidewalks, is that if you put in a sidewalk and you have a certain width of space of the road that you're putting it in, is that going to then diminish where people currently bike? In other words, will putting a sidewalk push bikes more into a closer proximity to vehicles, whether there's a biking lane there or not, but people are going to bike. So my concern is putting a sidewalk will squish the space.
Well, they may have to be answered individually at the location. The most likely place that would ever occur is on a bridge. So as they're otherwise looking at the span of bridge that they would construct, obviously they're looking at the travel lanes for the cars, the width of either a safety lane or a bicycle lane if otherwise provided, and then subsequently a sidewalk. But in most all instances, the bridges will have to be replaced as a part of this project. So it's a matter of them determining what was accommodated. So it shouldn't be a right-of-way issue because, again, the bridges are over right-of-way. So, that's not necessarily an issue. And WISDOT is already going through their real estate acquisition process. So the final design will be accommodated either way. It shouldn't be a either or.
Alderman Strelchak.
I think as we're building town center and we're promoting this and we're doing a huge effort to make sure that this takes off as a great success, the businesses along Port Road want to know that they're part of the community and they continue to be a part of the community. And as we look at this, creating a safe community, if it costs us a little plowing in the winter for a sidewalk, or maybe we wouldn't have to, I don't know that the savings is that great. But if you can get a kid from the east side of the freeway over to a Port Road business so they could go to Culver's or, stop in at one of the restaurants or go to the shops or meet friends or do something, I think you've got a better connected community. And getting from the east side to just over the freeway, which is a very cumbersome and busy intersection with a safe place where families or kids or just even adults commuting can get from one place to the next without worrying about getting run over. I'm heavily in support of any one of these ones that you're bringing up, but just this point of being able to get from point A to point B without worrying about getting hit by a car that's basically in the lane that you're trying to walk in is just critical for resident safety.
So, should we have a straw poll on this item? All in favor of it, raise their hand. Anybody opposed? Okay. Does the Common Council support a sidewalk at the Highland Road interchange, generally between Lakeshore Drive North to Port Washington Road? This is the one over the bridge. Am I reading this correctly?
Correct. So similarly, because Lakeshore splits in that location, that's where they would take it again to the nearest intersection. Not the WISDOT project would not subsequently take it all the way out to Lakeshore.
Right. Do we need to discuss this, or can we vote on this? Alderman Garrell?
I'm going to be real quick. I usually am. This one, I think, is a definite yes. I mean, you got Concordia over there. It's a definite yes on my part. Being the alderman over there, that's something that we should have. The next one coming up, if we could probably take them both, is I see no reason for. Does the Common Council support a sidewalk at the Pioneer Road interchange east to Port Washington Road? I don't see, I think my residents would never use that. There's nothing over there. There's empty fields. There's one area, giant area, that can't be developed because that Mark Molesky owns, because beautiful area that DOT won't let him build an access road on it. So a lot of the area is going to stay dead area. So I'm going to be a yes on definitely a yes on the one over Highland Road, because those Concordia kids are going to use it. It's safe. It's going to be used a lot. And the other one, I think, is I don't see it's like a sidewalk to nowhere.
I'd be much more in favor of the first one if Concordia was allowed to have a dome over their practice facility, but anyhow, we'll move on from that. Any other comments on the first item? Okay, all in favor of the sidewalk, Lakeshore Drive north to Port Washington Road, raise their hand. And then all in favor of the council supporting a sidewalk at the Pioneer Road interchange east to Port Washington Road, raise your hand. There was no support for the last one. There was unanimous support for the others. I still think we do need to, the County Line Road interchange,
Yeah, it was actually, yes,
we need to.
was otherwise written as a separate agenda item, so
But we need
if
to recommend it to.
Yes, so if we otherwise then look at the County Line Road interchange, for those that weren't on the council at the time, through a series of public information meetings, the option of a partial interchange was otherwise presented and reviewed and supported by the residents. As the DOT moved through the process and the design, FHWA notified them that partial interchanges would not be allowed. And so
Explain what a partial interchange is for those who are not here.
yes, so
read the packet.
a full interchange would be on-ramps and off-ramps in both directions on both sides of the highway. And in this case, because there's only an on-ramp in one direction and an off-ramp in the other direction, it's otherwise considered a partial interchange. After FHWA notified the DOT that the partial interchange would not otherwise be allowed, because that was never represented in public information meetings, the city requested a neighborhood meeting whereby WISDOT would notify what was generally considered effective parties to host a neighborhood meeting and review the options of a full interchange or no interchange, which at that point were the only options. The residents were not at all in favor of no interchange, but still were not in support of a full interchange and requested that the city otherwise advocate for and petition for the maintenance of a partial interchange. The city did so with the previous resolution that was approved in 2013. WISDOT took two different approaches with FHWA. First, the request for the partial interchange, which was subsequently denied, and then they took one for what they call a phased construction. So the idea was they would build the partial interchange as it otherwise exists, with the idea that the other on-ramps and off-ramps would be constructed when traffic warrants, the idea being that traffic would potentially never warrant the other two on-ramps, which was also subsequently denied by FHWA. However, 5 years has passed, as has there been some turnover in employees both at the state level and the federal level. And so WISDOT is providing the city with the opportunity to request the state to otherwise petition as a part of this project again for the maintenance of a partial interchange. I do want to note, because Alderman Schneider had previously asked, time is of the essence. Unfortunately, they're moving forward with final design, so they're looking for feedback from the city now, because the process to petition the federal government certainly takes some time and could otherwise impact the final design for the project.
I would add that partial interchange saves, at least DOT thought, $2 to $3 million on the project. And at least the city didn't believe at the time, and DOT frankly believes, probably there would be very little usage of the full interchange as opposed to the partial interchange. And while this isn't our money, we are taxpayers, the state of Wisconsin, and we are, so are our residents, and therefore it may be being a good steward to at least take a crack at the state saving the money here and using it on a more worthy road project. But Alderman Nurbin.
Yeah, I agree with the cost savings rationale. I also think it's laughable that the FHWA only says we're going to save $2 or $3 million by building half of it, because these are $20 to $40 million endeavors at every interchange. If you don't build half of it, you're gonna save half of it, not 10% of it. I'm looking at the revised plans, and it's bringing back bad memories from 5 or 6 years ago. I'm glad they've gotten rid of the Catherine Drive underpass. That was just plain horrible. But I'm not sure that the plans they have here are a whole lot better. It's very troubling with the way they've got it laid out, especially around Catherine Drive with the north on-ramp. And access to the west side of the dog park is just gonna be horrendous. It's right in, right out. You can't make a left in or take a left out. There's nowhere to queue traffic getting onto the on-ramp from people traveling south on Kearney Drive to north. It's gonna cause all sorts of traffic problems. They've got a lot of work to do on this if they're actually gonna build a full interchange, which I suspect will still be their intent.
Well, they will be holding additional public input.
Yes.
These things are the actual questions that are before us. They need to get in the queue because
Yeah,
it's not just them, it's others who need to rule on them, so.
I'm just saying, they've got a lot of work to do. This
And-
is far from acceptable.
The construction plans, the current version, while otherwise shared with me, are in the thousands of pages. So I just included the concept plan again from 2015. So this version is what the most recent one was at that time. I didn't include the actual construction plans because I'm not sure they're very meaningful, so.
Alderman Strelchak.
Just, one side thought, slightly off subject, because it is committee of whole, this is a really good spot to bring it up. DOT, when they install new interchanges, they typically put some cameras in. Again, if we can, while we're looking at the plans, just look to see if they've got cameras and then see if there is a tie-in for public safety and the police department to be able to have access to those as well at these interchanges. One of the biggest resident concerns at the Highland Road interchange was, new people on and off the freeway and crime and everything else. I think if there was some camera access by the police department at that place, that would alleviate some of those concerns for those residents.
I would
especially
suggest that public safety take that up and
Yeah.
pass a resolution that comes back to the council next month.
It's great, thank you. That's exactly what I was hoping to accomplish.
So, anybody else on the, yes, Alderman Boucher.
This was a general question back to our overall packet on this, if it's okay to interject here.
Sure.
On packet page 184, this is going back to a document from 2014. Just a question I have and a concern, if this is still holds and where it came from. And that
Yeah.
is
Yes,
city responsibilities, section B, number 3. It says, city agrees that it shall not petition Ozaki County for a period of no less than 10 years from the construction completion date of the Highland Road interchange for the expansion of driving lanes on Port Washington Road north of Glen Oaks Lane. Where's that?
Correct. This is a signed MOU that the city entered into with Ozaki County to otherwise split its local share portion of the cost of Highland Road interchange with Ozaki County. So this document, yes, is
Funding part of it.
The
in
contract
place.
we currently
Is
have.
the contract we have,
we
yep.
can't petition to expand
Alderman Schneider.
Washington Road.
Alderman Bushy.
Can't petition them to.
Hello. One of the things about this was supposedly, I asked Kristen the same question, I had the same concern, but because of the interchange development, that there should be less traffic on Port Road because people will be able to access the highway in another place. So the idea being that we're not going to be, because the county is helping us, sharing the cost of the interchange, that they don't want us to go back to the county now asking for widening the Port Washington Road in the next 10 years.
I didn't include the city's resolution about the Highland Road interchange. It was one of the links, but the city also promised at the time that it would not expand Highland Road as a result of the project either.
All items that we're addressing at the policy subcommittee. Anything else on the actual resolution we need to recommend to the council? Do we have a motion?
Move to recommend per our straw votes, our votes.
No, on the issue of
This
The
resolution.
interchange.
the
Interchange?
Yes, the resolution
Maintaining
is
the
written.
partial interchange. We haven't had a straw vote on that.
That's correct.
That is a resolution that we need to recommend to the council one way or another, so we can address it later in our meeting.
don't you take the lead on that?
I'll make the motion to recommend that the Common Council in maybe 5 minutes votes to affirm the desire for a partial interchange, so long as we note that no interchange would be a complete disaster and is far worse than ending up with a full interchange.
Second?
So we had a motion?
Yes.
Second.
I was getting interrupted. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
So it's recommended to the Common Council. Ordinance 2000, let me go back to the agenda here.
19.
Ordinance 2019-1546, an ordinance amending Chapter 2 of the Mequon Municipal Code, establishing health insurance continuation payout option for non-represented employees, recommended by finance personnel in July, first reading at the Common Council in August. Do we have a motion?
Move approval?
I'll second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Alderman Strelchuk,
Aye.
Alderman Bushy,
Aye.
Alderman Meyer,
Aye.
Alderman Hancher,
Aye.
Alderman Garrow,
Aye.
Alderman Schneider,
Aye.
Aye.
Passes 7-0. Ordinance 2019-1551, an ordinance amending Chapter 1558 of the Mequon Municipal Code relating to animal regulations, recommended by Public Welfare July 9, recommended by Planning Commission July 22, first reading on August 13. Do we have a motion?
Move approval.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Alderman Bushy,
Aye.
Alderman Meyer,
Aye.
Alderman Hancher,
Aye.
Alderman Garrow,
Aye.
Alderman Schneider,
Aye.
Alderman Nurbin,
Aye.
Next ordinance.
Alderman Strelchuk,
Aye.
Sorry.
I get to vote?
Next ordinance, neither did I. Next ordinance, 2019-1552, an ordinance amending Chapter 14 of the code relating to alcoholic beverage licensing, recommended by finance personnel in August, first reading at Common Council in August. Do we have a motion?
Move approval?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? If not, please call the roll.
Alderman Meyer,
Aye.
Alderman Hancher,
Aye.
Alderman Garrow,
Aye.
Alderman Schneider,
Aye.
Alderman Nurbin,
Aye.
Alderman Strelchuk,
Aye.
Alderman Bushy.
Aye.
Next ordinance, 2019-1553, amending Chapter 46 of the Mequon Municipal Code, establishing safety zones around automatic teller machines,
Move to-
recommended by Public Safety July 9, first reading at the Common Council August 13, brought to you by Alderman Boucher. Do we
Move
have
to
a motion?
approve. Move to approve.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Please
I
call.
just have a question about that. My understanding when Alderman Bushy was proposing this, it was related to ATMs that were outside of buildings, and I'm just not sure why this Quick Trip on Cedarburg Road is in there. Is the ATM outside of the building there?
No, it's not.
In Quick Trip, it's within the store itself. They have
Okay.
two of them in like the kind of main aisle, the first aisle when you go in.
So, but wasn't your intention to have these for?
No, that's an example saying, so that if they're within it, then that there's, where it's not feasible.
I think
to
within
not-
any buildings, this is not really feasible. If there's customers around, we can't expect people to stand
That's
back.
actually what it's saying. That's an exception to the ordinance.
Okay. I thought the ordinance just going to say they're for outdoor ATMs only.
Well, it says there are exceptions in the ordinance for those cases where a clear conflict could exist. For example, the ATMs within the Quick Trip. So those ATMs aren't covered by this ordinance, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
So we're covered.
Okay.
It does say, it's limited to ATMs that are not located inside of an open business. So that means that are outside. I don't
Right.
know why it wasn't worded as
Yeah.
outside, but,
Okay.
so we have a
Nonetheless,
motion and a second. We have a
it's-
clarification.
it's
Can you call the roll, please?
Alderman Hancher,
Aye.
Alderman Garrow.
Aye.
Alderman Schneider,
Aye.
Alderman Nurbin,
Aye.
Alderman Strelchuk,
Aye.
Alderman Bushy,
Aye.
Alderman Meyer.
Aye.
And that passes. Resolution 3634, authorizing staff to issue permits to Ozaukee County for the Little Menominee River Corridor Ecosystem Restoration Project at 9104 West Mequon Road. This was recommended by the Public Works Committee on July 9th. There was a public hearing at the Common Council on July 9th. It was tabled at the Common Council on July 9th. It was approved at the Common Council August 13th. And there's a further recommendation forthcoming by Public Works. What did Public Works say?
Public Works recommended 3-0.
Okay, so this is a modification of what we passed last month. Does anybody need an explanation, or are we fine? Alderman Carroll?
Yeah, I just wonder why the, I guess if they asked for something, now we're come back and it's the first modification already on this deal. And did we ever get that in perpetuity piece that there was a condition of this, or is that something else that's gonna come back later on and, maybe we'll get it, maybe we won't get it? Because I know that homeowners don't get to start on their properties until their permits are issued. Just like some clarification as to why this is so different.
It's actually not different. The resolution is otherwise the same as it relates to the stream bank portion of the project. Ozaukee County has subsequently requested that we permit separately the wetland restoration portion of the project from the stream bank project, and most of that is due to the grant funding that expires at the end of this year that's otherwise associated with it. And I think part of the reason why the request for the change is otherwise being made is it is the city that otherwise put on the requirements that as a condition of the issuance of permits, the intergovernmental cooperation agreement would have to include certain clauses that need to go through not only the county board for approval, but MMSD for approval. And their concern is that the time frame for the approval of that document will be such that they would not be able to get the wetland restoration work done within the grant timeframe.
So they start the work on it, and then what happens if they come back and the Ozaukee County Board says, we're not giving this in perpetuity?
That's why they're
piece?
separating it out. So then they would only be authorized for the wetland restoration work, which, at least from my listening from the public hearing, was not otherwise opposed by the adjacent property owners. So then just the wetland restoration portion of the project would be complete and not the stream bank portion.
So they'd be able to take care of the stuff on the west side, but they wouldn't be able to mess around with the river, the current stream that's there, and do the meander thing and all the rest of that stuff unless they've got the perpetuity.
Or unless they come back.
Right.
Okay.
So, do we have Alderman Boucher?
I guess, Chris, while you're here, if you could also comment about the maintenance and how that would go as we discussed earlier.
Yes, so the commissioner for MMSD actually already reached out to the mayor requesting permission, which they actually don't need, to start on the invasive species removal.
And that with who would end up being responsible ultimately for that.
Well, right now, MMSD, it's the intergovernmental cooperation agreement that could include the transfer of property that would otherwise have the county be responsible.
The expectation is that the county will take title to the property and that they have to come back to us with the in perpetuity thing or they never get their stream. But we've already told them they can start removing invasive species, which I don't think anybody would object to. And this allows them to do some of the work on the west side of the property that benefits the area no matter what. And if they don't give us the in perpetuity thing, they're never going to get the part that they really want to do anyhow. Alderman Meyer, you had a question?
Yeah, I had a question, maybe to the city attorney. F, line 3, it said agreement between MMSD and Ozaukee County address in form and content reasonably acceptable to the city of Mequon. Is there a reason why we're using the word reasonably instead of just plainly acceptable to the city of Mequon?
That was the language we passed last month.
I know,
That's what I said.
right, but we're looking at it again, so I'm just trying to see if there's any ramifications for us using reasonably compared to.
I mean, arguably, there's, the use of reasonably becomes a potential point of argument down the road that, hey, your acceptance of this language isn't reasonable, or denial, I should say, of the language is not reasonable, and so it potentially is a point of contention, but it is fairly standard language that's used within agreements where you're working with
multiple people that
Well, we may have some issues down the road with that, using that.
potentially. I mean, it depends on what the language is, obviously.
So I make a motion to strike the word reasonably.
Second.
There's not a motion.
We have a motion and a second to strike the word well, first of all, do we have
We don't have a motion.
that would be an amendment, right? Do we have a motion on the original motion?
Yeah.
Or are you moving to approve it without the word reasonable?
Without the word reasonably.
Is that what you're asking for?
Yes.
Should we split the question about the removal of the word reasonably? Anybody want to, or are you fine? Yes.
I think we should. If I dial back to the other meeting, I think the intent of the word reasonable was, we had no idea what the county was gonna come back and propose to settle the in perpetuity part for maintenance. They need to make us a reasonable offer. That's all we're asking for. We get to determine later if it's reasonable and then approve it or not approve it.
But if we would disapprove it, they could argue that we're not being reasonable. I do think Alderman Meyer is correct that way, although that's pretty, it was my suggestion.
We can just
the language
disagree
is
about what
fairly standard.
what's reasonable and.
Let's split the question. We will have a vote on whether to remove the word reasonably. Please call the roll.
Alderman Garrow,
Aye.
Alderman Schneider,
Aye.
Alderman Nurbin,
No.
Alderman Strelchak,
Aye.
Alderman Bushy.
Aye.
Alderman Meyer,
Aye.
Alderman Hancher.
Aye.
Now, we have we do have a motion and a second on the underlying resolution. Please call the roll.
Alderman Schneider,
Aye.
Alderman Nurbin,
Aye.
Alderman Strelchak,
Aye.
Alderman Bushy,
Aye.
Alderman Meyer,
Aye.
Alderman Hancher,
Aye.
Alderman Garrow.
Aye.
The next item is a resolution approving the purchase of 2 sets of hydraulic rescue tools from 5 Alarm of Delafield, Wisconsin, in the total amount of $57,990. Public safety, what did you do?
We move to approve this.
All right. Do we have a motion?
Yep, moving to approve it from the Common Council.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Please call the roll.
Alderman Nurbin,
Aye.
Alderman Strelchak,
Aye.
Alderman Bushy.
Aye.
Alderman Meyer,
Aye.
Alderman Hancher,
Aye.
Alderman Garrow,
Aye.
Alderman Schneider.
Aye.
The next item is Resolution 3646, a resolution affirming Resolution 2013-3193. This is for the partial interchange. We just had a recommendation from the Committee of the Whole. Do we have a motion to approve the resolution?
Move to approve per the recommendation of Committee of the Whole.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Please call the roll.
Alderman Strelchak,
Aye.
Alderman
Aye.
Bushy, Alderman Meyer,
Aye.
Alderman Hancher,
Aye.
Alderman Garrow,
Aye.
Alderman Schneider,
Aye.
Alderman Nurbin.
Aye.
No specified unfinished business, no petitions, memorials, remonstrances, or communications. We do have one mayoral appointment. That's the Architectural Board, Jason Dezorak, Reserve Panel Member for District 3. Do we have a motion?
Move approval.
A
Second.
motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 And we have one final motion of the evening. Who wants to make it?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.